Okay, welcome back everyone. I'm here again with a very special guest. We spoke with him previously about the planet Saturn, and today we're going to be talking to him about the eclipses and what it means to experience an eclipse within your chart by transit. So I'd like to welcome John Marchesella.
All right, how are you?
Thank you for being here with us today, John.
My pleasure.
So one of the things that I'm curious about, based on your practice and your experience, in your work, in your experience, how do you see eclipses? How do you work with eclipses? To you, what does it mean when you know that an eclipse time period is coming up for yourself and your clients?
Eclipses are really powerful forces in prediction, and in two different ways. In the little picture, what I've just noticed based on my experience is what I like to call the eclipse period. And in the standard solar eclipse, lunar eclipse, or vice versa, I use what I like to call the eclipse period, which is 2 weeks leading into the first eclipse, 2 weeks between the two eclipses, and then 2 weeks after the last eclipse. So that amounts to 6 weeks in a usual format. And you could just, when you're sensitive to it, and actually you don't even have to be sensitive to it, you can see the anxiety rise in those first 2 weeks. And then it's at a feverish pitch between the two eclipses, and then it kind of eases in the last 2 weeks. I always tell my students, thank goodness for the eclipses, they keep us in business.
Right.
With that heightened anxiety, anticipation, there's that feeling of what's going on. So people call their doctor, their therapist, their acupuncturist, and their astrologers with that question, what's going on?
Right.
And I tell them, you're in the eclipse. We're all in the eclipse. We're eclipsed. We're in the dark, and we can't see. We can't see where we're going. We can't see what comes next. We can't see the next steps. We can't see the outcome. We don't see what we're supposed to do. So I tell people, just follow nature. Wait and see. And after the eclipse period, after those 6 weeks, when things come to light, then you start seeing clearly. I don't think any doom will come upon us if we take action during eclipse period, but I think we'll just wind up with a lot of egg on our face, maybe in a position to apologize or rectify things, and we usually can. But it's usually an awful lot of energy that is spent for much ado about nothing until after the eclipse. Then we see the real effect. I'm not saying that eclipses are nothing. Very powerful, but we don't see their effect until after they leave, and then by hindsight, we can make sense of them. And the power of the eclipse, whatever's going on during an eclipse, will stay in effect for at least 6 months until the next set of eclipses, and sometimes we can even feel it for a whole year.
Right. And so that's important to note that the eclipses happen every 6 months.
Correct.
Right. And, what you mentioned about the whole year, what I've noticed is that when people have an eclipse occurring from my perspective, being a Vedic astrologer, I refer to Rahu as the north node of the moon and Ketu as the south node of the moon. So those years, I see them particularly being felt if that Rahu or north node is actually transiting over like a person's natal sun or moon. So have you found that to be true too? Or when you see it as a year for you, how does that usually work out?
The eclipse, in that 6 week period, the eclipse is always intense for everybody, but the range of intensity will vary from person to person.
Right.
So in Western astrology, if the eclipse is on your sun or moon or in a hard aspect to any other planet, that would make it a little bit more intense. And it will be colored by the sign that it's in. There are some signs, obviously, that are more intense than others. For instance, when an eclipse takes place in Scorpio, for instance.
Right.
And then if the eclipse is taking place with any transiting planets, so if it is an eclipse that is conjoined with Pluto, it's sure to be intense, or making a hard aspect to any of the other planets. Then you start getting the effect of a double whammy.
Right. So this next eclipse that's going to be coming up will be occurring in tropical Virgo, correct?
Correct.
or tropical Virgo and Pisces as well.
Yeah, the solar eclipse on September 1st will be at 9 in Virgo. And on the 16th of September, there's a lunar eclipse at 24 Pisces.
And so how do you work with that, considering, I mean, so Jupiter is going to be somewhat involved there. I mean, he's further along in Virgo. Would you include him in that assessment, or is he too far away?
I think he's going to be a little too far away at this point.
Okay.
He'll even be shifting into Libra by the time that we get to the middle of September.
Right.
So I wouldn't include Jupiter in it. But the way that you would work with eclipses is, for the solar eclipse, just take 9 of Virgo and put that in whatever house it falls. And that's where you're going to get that area of life, according to the house, will be where you get the eclipse energy, where you get the manic, the panic, the frantic, the hectic, the chaos, the intensity, the charge, the anxiety, the anticipation. That's the area of life that you'll have in it. Now, the closer in orb that it is to an aspect to a natal planet or angle, the more significant it becomes and the more intense it is. If it's within 5 degrees, then whatever events might occur, not just the but events within 5 degrees would be a little bit more significant. If it's within 3 degrees, more so. And if it's right on within a degree, then it's really intense.
Right. I see. So this is determining the intensity and range of power. Right. Yeah.
And also, to say, it will depend on what kind of eclipse it is, too.
Okay.
Total eclipses are more powerful than partial eclipses.
Okay.
And then what happens later on in the year is that when that degree is transited by some other planet, and it always will be at least 3 months later, the sun will square that degree and trigger off, kind of reverberate the effect of the eclipse.
Right.
Sometimes eclipses, if they make an event, and sometimes they do, right in the eclipse, sometimes people will get the event. Then 3 months later, then there's like an aftershock. There's a reverberation.
Gotcha.
And then 3 months after that, when we get into the next eclipse. If there isn't an event, and only a seed is planted for an event, then when it's transited later on, then you get the event. And that always happens with at least the sun, but you can use Mars as a good trigger too.
Okay. Okay. So when you're thinking about these eclipses, and we're thinking about this eclipse occurring in Virgo, and for a Pisces ascendant, that's going to be their 7th house. So that means that a lot of this confusion or events might occur related to their relationships, correct?
Correct.
Or if it's Sagittarius and it's the 10th house, and it might be more career related. Is that so?
Yeah, if you're using whole sign houses.
Yeah, correct. Sorry. I haven't figured out the intercepted thing yet, so I can't speak to that. But okay.
I use the Placidus system.
Uh-huh.
So it would be whatever for me, it would be whatever Placidus house. But yeah,
right.
Sure.
Okay. And what about just the sheer fact of it being in the sign of Virgo, like that whole Virgo Pisces axis? Like, is there anything specific, since that's what we're going to be experiencing, all of us? What's something that we could anticipate, just by knowing that it's going to be with those 2 signs?
Organization, disorganization, service, selflessness. Virgo is very much about being the servant,
right.
And Pisces is very much about being the slave.
Mm.
It would be about functionality, productivity, efficiency, Virgo.
Right.
Versus the chaos that Pisces can be.
Right.
And you'll feel it also, by the way, in the world. There are world events that go on during eclipses that often have to do with signs.
Right.
Virgo Pisces might be medicine or something in the healing professions. It could have a lot to do with agriculture. Virgo has a lot to do with agriculture, especially organic agriculture. Pisces has to do with the waters.
Right. What about, so would you look to Neptune's influence on these cycles? I mean, because Neptune's in Pisces right now. I think that's right. Yeah, looking at my chart here. So would that add any, extra flair to these eclipses, having Neptune involved? And if so, how would you look at that?
Correct. But when you were talking about Jupiter before, I was going to say, it's not really Jupiter that would be within orb of the eclipse, but rather Neptune. And that does make a double whammy, because then that will, the Neptune is actually in aspect to the Virgo eclipse, which makes that eclipse a little Neptunian, but the lunar eclipse is already Neptunian, being in the sign of Pisces.
Right. Okay. Yes.
So I guess we'll say, who knows what's going on?
Right. Okay. Good. Good.
By the way, I also wanted to say that there's a chain effect from eclipse to eclipse to eclipse.
Okay.
So
what you mean by cyclically? Is that okay?
So we should always go back to the previous eclipse and see what happened, and this will be like the next shoe that drops. And so too, the unknownness, the mystery of this eclipse, the next eclipse, the next shoe will drop next February.
Gotcha.
And a good example of this in a world pattern, the last eclipse, President Obama went to Cuba for the first time. The eclipse before that, the Pope came to the United States.
Fascinating. Right.
You always get that kind of thing. And there are always world events, not always disturbing, but usually disturbing.
Right. Well, from the Vedic perspective, Rahu, or the North Node, is often seen as to be like a groundbreaking planet. So, with Western, or I'm sorry, I don't mean to use that term so broadly, but you know what I mean. Not non-Vedic astrology. Is the North Node also seen to be kind of like a groundbreaking energy? And if so, could it just shake things up in such a way that we make new discoveries in the areas in which the node is occurring in, or the eclipse is occurring in? Does that make?
Yeah, the North Node, I think, would be more about the new.
Mm-hmm.
Something new comes to light. With the South Node, it would be something old, something that we thought maybe was done, finished, out of our hair, put behind us, and then the dead come back to life.
Right, yeah, that makes sense, because Ketu, or the South Node, is also seen to be the past life influence. And those things that we think we've taken care of, but we still have a little bit of imbalance to work out. So, okay, so thinking of...
The funny thing about being eclipsed, and I said before, being in the dark, there are actually two ways that it happens, and it's based, I think, on the North Node and the South Node. There are times when the eclipse happens and people use expressions like, I'm in the dark. I'm waiting to hear, but they're not getting back to me. I'm looking for an interview, but they don't want to see me. I'm looking around for houses, but I can't see anything. And we're in the dark that way. But other times there are eclipses that do bring so much information to light. Those are usually the South Node eclipses.
Right.
And there's so much information that now I'm blinded and I can't see. And it's like, whoa, let me process this before I really know where I'm going. Mm-hmm. So it's funny that eclipses can be the withholding of information or an overwhelming amount of information, depending on the North and the South.
Well, either way, it's hard to react to that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
They keep on saying, wait and see, just wait and see.
Well, that wait and see, I find that, I'm fascinated by the fact that you keep using that term, because when I'm working with clients and I see a node going through a particular house, particularly Rahu, one of the things I'll tell them is that the node transiting that house around the cusp, that's not usually a good time to make a serious decision, because it's more of a brainstorming time period, or a time period to, like you're saying, step back and see what all the options are that kind of roll out. And then after it passes, or after it moves out of that sign or past the orb of that cusp, then the person is able to say, all right, I've seen it all. Now I can actually make a decision that might be more supportive of what I want to achieve. Is that a similar thing with the eclipses that you see then?
Yes, yes. Yeah, we would use words like, you're not of good judgment because you don't have all the facts,
right, or
you're not of sound mind right now. I always make the connection between a lunar eclipse and you're in your lunacy.
Ah, right.
You're behaving like a lunatic right now, and you might be operating too rashly, impulsively, emotionally, and that's never wise, well-informed decisions.
Right. Yeah, go ahead.
And then also the bigger picture of cycles, by the way, eclipses recur approximately every 19 years. Mm-hmm. So we can always go back 19 years and see what was happening, both in world events as well as in our personal lives.
Right. And the key there, though, is to really think about the house that it's occurring in, Right. So for the individual, figure out what house is Virgo, what house is Pisces for you, and then see when those eclipse periods are happening, and then pay attention to those areas of life based on what houses that those eclipses are falling in, correct? Okay. Okay, great. Yeah, excellent information. Well, that brings me to the end of my questions. Is there anything else you'd like to add about eclipses that you think your clients or anyone in the world would like to, would appreciate knowing to prepare for what, what's coming up for us?
A couple of little things just to be aware of, more as an example of what eclipses are, that they are our light. The sun and moon are our lights. And the eclipse, our lights go out. So frequently, we lose famous people during the eclipses. And it's usually someone, even if you didn't like them, but you still feel bad. It's like a collective hush. Princess Diana died on an eclipse. And then right after that, it was Mother Teresa. Michael Jackson died on eclipse. Farrah Fawcett died on the same eclipse on the same day. Usually there's a cluster of like 2 or 3 deaths all at the same time. And then interesting, Pope John Paul was born on an eclipse. He died on an eclipse.
Wow.
And he was buried the week that Prince Charles was going to marry Camilla. But they bumped their wedding date in honor of the Pope's funeral.
Right.
So just interesting how this set of royalty trumps that set of royalty.
Right. Yeah, I never even would have thought of that. That's fantastic.
And there are things, particularly in royal families, I mean, literally in the royal family, Prince William was born on the eclipse. It's interesting that he was born on the eclipse. His mother died on the eclipse.
Right.
And so we see interesting patterns like that with whatever our royal families might be.
Why, I mean, do you have a minute to talk about that? Do you mind if we go on a little further? Why do you think that is? I mean, because when I think about eclipses, I think of like Aleister Crowley. I think of, people, the royalty aspect doesn't always necessarily the first thing that comes to my mind. So what is that about? Why, how can we tie that in?
The sun is...
Oh, the sun, right, yes, okay.
The moon is the cosmic queen.
Gotcha, okay. Yeah, that didn't occur to me. I was focused on Rahu, or excuse me, I was focused on the nodes. I wasn't focused on what they were dealing with. Excellent, okay, well.
It's the sun, more obviously, the moon is as royal as the sun is, but in Western society, the sun gets all the credit.
Right.
And for him to be covered, eclipsed, put in the dark, that's a pretty big deal. It's also where we get the expression, the king is dead, long live the king. Eclipses often, on a collective level in mundane astrology, will often indicate like the end of an era and then the beginning of a new era.
Right, letting go of the past and bringing in something new. Right, excellent, yeah. Okay, fantastic. All right, well, and thank you for joining us today, John. It's a pleasure to have you again. And maybe there'll be another interesting trends coming up that we can talk about in a few months from now, if you're up for it.
I hope so.
Okay, thank you very much, John.
Okay, thanks a lot. Be well.